us consumers, we moved everything into the digital space. We connect digitally, we decide digitally, we buy digitally. And the banks have not been able to be along on that journey, right? So there's been a greater and greater gap between consumers and the banks. And now with open banking, you kind of have your bank back into your own pocket again.
We know that PSD2 started as a regulatory initiative from the European Central Bank. Have you noticed there a challenge for adoption of open banking or PSD2 related initiatives from the bank's perspective?
I would say what we've seen so far, if you kind of could talk about waves of open banking, I think the first wave has actually been initiated and rolled through by banks. So if you look at almost any market, the most active TPPs we have are the banks themselves. So they have actually been driving the agenda along with also being the providers of open banking, right? They provide the interfaces, but also consume them to a large degree, building account aggregation services in the mobile banking experiences, right? And what do they gain from that, you could ask? If you, as a consumer, have 2 or 3 banks, for instance, into play, banks could offer you to aggregate everything into their mobile experience or their web experience for you to then only perform banking through their app, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a battle of interface, like who owns the customer relationship, not only to customers they have, but also to other banks' customers.
Okay, so it's in the bank's best interest to be able to offer open banking solutions, just because otherwise customers would go for other banks that allow them to see all their accounts in one single place.
Yeah,
basically.
sure.
Right.
I would say banks, we have, in my company, we have like 43 banks as customers, and they have been the most vocal of all our customers in terms of like how to set this regime straight in terms of quality. So we work closely with these banks in order to provide the quality of open banking they need for their own services. And some of the things they need actually is in relation to the teams they have themselves that are delivering it on the other side, because they are the providers, right? So I would say banks have been driving this agenda for a long time. I know there's been a lot of talks about banks being reluctant to share data and so forth. And to some extent, yes, it makes sense that banks also want to make money of technologies they have to provide right now for free. So if you look at the PSD2 scope in the whole open banking space, that's very much related to only payment accounts. So if you want to aggregate accounts from savings or from mortgages or from loans, typically you can't do it through PSD2. And this is an opportunity for banks to then provide these kind of accesses on a commercial ground, right?
And would you say that there is any risk for banks to lose the customer interface by embedding open banking solutions in their ecosystem?
I would say on the contrary.
Okay.
I know that it has been the talk of the day and the topic of the century probably when we started talking PSD2, that now banks will become commodity, right?
Right.
But what happened is that us consumers, we moved everything into the digital space. We connect digitally, we decide digitally, we buy digitally. And the banks have not been able to be along on that journey, right? So there's been a greater and greater gap between consumers and the banks. And now with open banking, you kind of have your bank back into your own pocket again.
Right. Okay, and then if we look at it from a customer perspective, are there any particular challenges for customers embracing open banking solutions?
If you look at it from adoption curves, right, the first adoption curve that we had to work with was the maturity of PSD2 APIs in itself. When they launched the APIs back in 2018 or 19, the maturity wasn't that high. So everyone has been working, the banks have been working, the TPPs has been working, and all the aggregators have been working with banks on kind of raising the level of quality in the PSD2 APIs. I would say today we're pretty far off that kind of adoption curve. And then the other part has been the business adoption curves, where like getting businesses to build a solution that actually benefits someone has been, and educational thing for many companies to be providing like ours, right? We talk to many of our business about like how they can build the right use cases and so forth. And I think what we are facing now is that the maturity is there. The businesses are ripe to build services. So now we need to kind of also educate consumers on the benefits of doing open banking. And we say this happens in an environment where you also see a lot of abuse of data, where people are constantly being like used for banner retargeting. Cookies are being sold behind your back, right? Facebook is selling your data. We hear all these stories all the time.
Yeah.
And that's again where I said like GDPR is probably the best thing that happened here in European soil in terms of being able to share your data where you can expect it to be something for your purpose and your benefit, right? Because you have to give consent for the data and how it's processed.
Right.
And I feel like being able to give a clear consent and allow someone to process your data for this purpose, not for this purpose, is probably what's going to drive that adoption along with communication. So I expect to see a lot of open banking communication change from being labeled open banking to instead being about how you can benefit from doing X, Y, and Z with your account.